Hey guys, tonight we slip into a time when the moonlight glints off bronze helmets and smoke from animal fat torches twists through the midnight air. You're lying under thick woolen blankets, well, metaphorically, because you've been invited to an ancient Hittite encampment. It smells like whetstone tower sheep droppings and fire-roasted barley. Somewhere not far away, Fawam, a deal is being made, one that might stop a war, or might just delay the next one. You probably won't survive this if you decide to speak first. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge quietly across a frost-hardened patch of Anatolian earth. It's maybe 1300 BCE, Marsh, give or take a century, depending on which scribe forgot to include a leap moon. The sky glows faint orange at the edge of dawn, and you're flanked by the silhouettes of oxen, Karshim's temple guards, and a few half-asleep bureaucrats. Somewhere up ahead lies Hattusa, the great walled capital of the Hittite Empire, but you're not heading there yet. First stop, the negotiation tent. It's not a tent like the kind you'd use for glamping. It's a billowing structure of leather and dyed wool, stitched by palace women who also doubled as political spies. Its walls are thick to muffle voices, but porous enough for whispers to seep through. A sheep bleats nearby, not quite knowing. It will be both a witness and a source of ceremonial sealant by sundown. Inside the tent, the air holds a musky heat, tinged with oil and incense. You're handed a cup of barley beer, thick enough to chew, by a young assistant who hasn't blinked in 6 hours. No one's talking. Not because they don't have anything to say, but because in Hittite diplomacy, silence is golden, literally. The longer you can hold your tongue, the more powerful your side appears. Lose patience, lose leverage. And here's the kicker. While you sit there, eyes watering from the smoky oil lamp, your enemies, or mutual peace partners in eternal fraternity, are probably doing the same exact thing in an identical tent just 3 hills over. Historians still argue whether the Hittites invented the art of strategic silence might or just perfected it. But one thing is clear. They made negotiation a psychological marathon. Days could pass before anyone uttered a word beyond, "Would you care for more goat cheese?" And even that was a loaded statement. At the center of the tent lies a low, polished slab of wood. Maybe cedar, macaw, maybe imported elm. Here, the agreements are eventually laid out. Not on paper, not even on clay just yet. First, they're recited aloud, slowly, ritualistically, by a priest scribe with a voice like a rock slide in molasses. The goal isn't clarity, it's rhythm. A negotiation isn't just a discussion, it's a performance. Outside, drums beat at intervals, not for celebration, but to mark time. Every 4th beat is a reminder, don't rush. The sheep standing by, groomed, perfumed, mildly annoyed, waits with surprising dignity. Its fat will be rendered blessed, and eventually smeared onto the stone of sealing. Not for show, for binding. The gods, you see, are far more impressed by animal fat than your witty counter-arguments. And if you're wondering why no one just skips the sheep fat bit and signs the thing already, well, you clearly haven't met the Hittite pantheon. These gods have a temper. Mess up the ritual, Morakaz, and you're cursed for 33 generations. Give or take a few interpretive translations. One quirky detail. Some historians believe the Hittites intentionally introduced foul-smelling substances, like fermented mare's milk or garlic-soaked sandals, into the tent to test the endurance of their guests. Stay seated, stay strong. Gag, and you're metaphorically, sometimes literally, out. You shift slightly, noticing the worn grooves beneath your feet. Evidence of other negotiators who sat here centuries before you, probably arguing over oxen roots or divine names. And suddenly you realize this is how they made peace. Not with soaring speeches or trumpet blasts, but with sheep, smoke, and stubborn silence. And just when you think nothing will happen tonight, the lead diplomat on your side stands tromping very, very slowly. The room tightens. He raises a single hand. No words, just a gesture. The other side responds with an equally slow nod. No clapping, no relief, but the treaty begins to take form. The scribe reaches for his stylus and a block of wet clay. But not to write the terms, not yet. First, he draws a series of pictographs. The sun god's eye, a kneeling servant, a sheep with its legs tied but eyes open. These aren't instructions. They're omens, and you sit, watching, already understanding that this isn't about what's being said. It's about what's being seen, dak, smelled, dat, endured, nak, and remembered. You shift again, thinking of your own silent moments, awkward pauses in meetings, makas long elevator rides, first dates that didn't need that third espresso, Maybe the Hittites were onto something. By now the sheep is being led away. Not to the slaughter, more not yet. First it's paraded, dressed in dyed ribbons, tiny bells hanging from its horns. It's a walking peace treaty, and ironically, it has no idea what it's about to symbolize. The diplomats bow low, not to each other, but to the animal. One hand rests on the wool. The other points skyward. A vow is made. Silent, sacred, slightly sweaty. And so you drift off. The flickering torchlight dancing behind your eyelids. The scent of sheep fat mingling with cedar wood and smoke. This is diplomacy, or Hittite style, and it's only just begun.
You wake, or rather, you shift slightly, in the cool hush of early Hittite morning. The peace tent has deflated into a sort of tense waiting chamber. Nobody's gone home, not even the sheep. But nothing's quite moving either. It's like diplomacy is a glacier, silent, slow, and occasionally crushing. Today is for oaths, not casual pinky promises. These are full-on divine contracts, sealed under the suspicious gaze of storm gods, fertility goddesses, and whatever celestial being currently watches over sheep intestines. Before any actual treaty terms are even whispered, there must be a performance of devotion. You shuffle toward the ceremonial platform, a slab of polished basalt brought all the way from the mountains of Arana, supposedly blessed by a goddess who never blinks, which is mildly terrifying. A priest dressed in what looks like very elaborate curtains begins to chant. He's accompanied by a boy with a drum and an older woman holding what might be a feather duster or a sacred goose. Historians still argue whether these accessories had spiritual or hygienic purposes. You kneel, you don't speak. Instead, a scroll is unrolled, and while the text isn't meant for your ears, it's recited anyway in Old Hittite. You understand none of it. That's fine. Neither does the envoy from Egypt across the aisle, who nods sagely as if he's just remembered the lyrics to a very old hymn. Now here's where it gets interesting. A sheep is brought forward again, this time draped in gold thread cloth and bells, that chimes softly with every step. It is not the same sheep as last night. This one is cleaner and somehow more confident. It's probably a national celebrity. Or dinner. That line is always thin in the Bronze Age. The priest dips his hand in a bowl of rendered sheep fat. It glistens like lukewarm custard. You try not to gag. He then makes a slow circle around the platform, smearing the fat along carved symbols of the gods. This is the oath-binding ritual, and the fat acts like divine glue. No one quite knows why fat specifically, though one clay tablet suggests that the gods dislike dryness. Your side's chief negotiator steps forward. He presses a finger into the fat smear and touches his own forehead. It's not dramatic. It's strangely intimate. A gesture that says, "We mean it." The Egyptian does the same. They lock eyes, not in defiance, but in shared misery. These are two tired men who know that the alternative to peace is another 10 years of horses, mud, and awkward funerals. A mainstream historical fact, here it is. The Hittites were one of the few ancient powers who formalized treaties using parity clauses. That means the agreement stated both parties were equals, not conqueror and conquered first but allies. This was revolutionary. While other empires preferred treaties with a side of smugness, the Hittites leaned on mutual respect, or at least the illusion of it. And the sheep? Well, quirky detail coming up. Some scholars believe the Hittites would whisper the treaty into the sheep's ear before sealing the agreement. This wasn't symbolic. It was legally binding. The sheep was now a vessel of divine witness. And yes, the sheep was then sacrificed. Sorry, buddy. You watch the sheep lie down willingly, a possible sign of divine approval or exhaustion. Either way, a knife, wonders curbed and ceremonial, is drawn. The priest raises it, but does not strike. Not yet. In first, the silent question, are all parties in agreement? A pause. Another pause. And then, one by one, the diplomats nod. No words, no cheers, just solemn, almost reverent gestures. Now the sheep is sacrificed, its blood caught in a grooved stone basin. The ground drinks deep. The gods are watching, probably amused, possibly annoyed. You never really know with the Hittite pantheon. They once declared a city cursed because someone mispronounced a sacred syllable. That city never recovered. Even the rats moved out. The blood is mixed with wine and poured onto the ceremonial stone. You wonder if this is the part where peace becomes official. It's not. The treaty must now be spoken aloud. Not negotiated, sparring, not argued, just spoken. Both sides read from a shared tablet, written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of diplomacy. Think of it as the UN English of the late Bronze Age. The Akkadian words are stilted, wamako, dusty, and probably haven't made sense since the last solar eclipse. Still, everyone listens, because the words aren't just content. They're containers of meaning. You don't debate the clay, you respect it. Then comes the silence. Again, not a pause, a deliberate, echoing, head-bowing stillness. The moment where everyone, diplomats, priests, maybe even the surviving sheep outside, lets the agreement settle, like ash on a quiet battlefield. Only then are the seals pressed into the wet clay. Round stamps carved with lion heads, orc, storm god symbols. And, if you're feeling cheeky, your own personal crest, usually a bird or a stylized hand. The sheep fat is used one final time, smeared across the seal to make it permanent. Or at least on God-proof. You step back, you breathe. The smoke from the ritual brazier smells like myrrh and slow-roasting herbs. Your robes are heavier now, soaked in sweat, guilt, and sheep-scented peace. The deal is done. But of course, it's not really done. Not yet. Because now both sides must agree on how to transport the tablet. Who gets the original? Who keeps the duplicate? Where do you bury the just-in-case backup copy? In case both palaces burn down? Which, spoiler domes, they will. The sun is high now, casting long shadows across the valley. The wind has picked up, carrying the scent of ash, oskist grass, and something faintly metallic. You look around and realize even peace smells like a battlefield, just quieter. And so, with silence behind you, and a faint smear of fat still clinging to your fingers, you prepare for what comes next, the part where everyone pretends to be friends. You trudge downhill now, flanked by your fellow envoys, and a few scribes who look like they haven't blinked in 3 days. They carry clay tablets wrapped in linen, clutching them like precious infants, because in a very Hittite sense, they are. These aren't just treaties, they're talismans of empire. The Hittite Empire doesn't win every war, but it survives. Why? Because it knows how to negotiate like its life depends on it, mostly because it does. At the heart of Hittite power isn't military strength, though their chariots aren't too shabby, but their relentless obsession with diplomacy. You pass through stone gates carved with lions and eagles, into a city that looks like a fortress had a baby with an office complex. Hattusa is built for one thing, record keeping. Every square, every hall, every dark cold room is designed for documenting the deals that keep the empire stitched together. You glance left and see a scribal school. Inside, boys scrape at wax tablets learning how to form the cuneiform for copper, treaty, and my uncle's goat violated the grain quota again. These kids won't be warriors. They'll be future negotiators, spapelforce, ministers, nestor, and archivists. Because the Hittite Empire feeds not just on grain and tribute, but on treaties. There's a mainstream fact for you. At its height around 1300 BCE, the Hittite Empire spanned from western Anatolia, deep into Syria. That's a lot of border to babysit, and not enough armies to do it all the time. So, the Hittites mastered the art of paperwork with bite. They inked deals with rivals, vassals, and even gods. You climb toward the inner citadel, where the royal archives are kept, in temperature-stable rooms buried beneath stone. Here, thousands of clay tablets sit on wooden shelves. Every single one of them is a promise, a demand, or a really passive-aggressive letter to a king who forgot a birthday gift. One tablet reads like this: "To the king of Ugarit, my brother, why have your merchants entered my city bearing no silver? This is not fitting conduct between brothers." The term brother is doing some heavy lifting here. It's the Bronze Age version of "with all due respect." And then there's the real gem, the parity treaties. These are long, repetitive documents, in which both kings agree they are definitely equals. Wink, wink. And will totally not invade each other next harvest season. They include clauses like, if an enemy comes to your land, you must send 100 chariots. And if I forget your daughter's name, it's definitely not a political insult. Historians still argue whether these parity treaties were sincere, or just glorified stalling tactics. What's clear, though, is that the Hittites had no illusions about eternal peace. A treaty was never a finish line. It was a reset button. one that allowed both sides to regroup, and if necessary, rearm. You watch as scribes press cylinder seals into still damp clay, imprinting the deal with divine authority. Each seal has its own signature image. Maybe a lion eating a gazelle, or a god holding thunderbolts in both hands like ancient nunchucks. It's dramatic, sure, but it's also legal. Once sealed, a treaty isn't just a promise between kings. It's a cosmic contract. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some treaties include a clause that if either party breaks the agreement, they must pay restitution in sheep. Not gold, not land. Sheep. And not just any sheep. Clean, unblemished, socially respectable sheep. The kind that could attend a dinner party without embarrassing you. You step into the royal records chamber. It's cool and shadowed. The walls lined with copies of every major treaty the Hittites have ever made. Some are duplicates. One for the archive, one for public display, and one to be buried near a temple for divine reference. And yes, sometimes they buried treaties inside statues of gods, as if even stone might whisper, "Hey, remember that peace vow you made? There's a scent here, dry clay, old wood, and something sharp. Maybe the ink, maybe the ghosts of broken pacts." You run your fingers across a tablet labeled Treaty of Sun and Storm. It's older than most nations you've heard of, and it still holds. This empire, you realize, isn't held together by brute force. It's held together by ritual, us memory, and an obsessive documentation habit. Think less Game of Thrones. Don't more bureaucracy, the epic, but the system works, for now. Because here's the catch. The more treaties you make, the more people you rely on to remember them. And the more you rely on memory, the more fragile your empire becomes. One lost tablet, one mistranslated oath, and the next generation is waging war over a promise forgotten. You exit the archive and blink into the sunlight. A child runs past. One to seek and be self, pretending his wooden toy is a chariot. Somewhere, a priest is chanting over a stack of new tablets, ready for another negotiation. You smile, imagining the quiet power of the pen. Or stylus in this case, scripting the empire's survival, one sheep fat-coated clause at a time. Then, as the city bell sounds noon, with a hollow bronze clang, you hear a voice murmur behind you. New envoy from Egypt wants to renegotiate the grain clause. Of course they do. And you straighten your robe. Because in Hadassah, peace isn't an achievement, it's a job. You're back on the road now, this time heading toward the dusty plains of Syria, where the stakes are hotter, the tempers shorter, and the chariots louder, because no story about Hittite diplomacy makes sense without talking about the Battle of Kadesh. Yeah, that one, the showdown that launched 1,000 scribes and produced the first known international peace treaty. Though, let's be honest, both sides still claim they won. You feel the heat rise from the cracked soil beneath your sandals. This place doesn't welcome peace easily. The Orontes River cuts through the battlefield like a lazy snake. And on either side, armies of staggering size line up. Somewhere in the distance, AC Stalfersind, and if Mostifri reach behind, you hear the creak and groan of wooden wheels, the neighing of war horses, and the slap of leather reins. Chariots, so many chariots. Mainstream historians estimate that over 5,000 chariots clashed at Kadesh around 1274 BCE. Though honestly, it could have been less. Ancient sources weren't great with numbers. You might write 20 and mean glorious legion of thundering iron. It's all in the marketing. The Hittite king Muwatallitus faces off against Ramses II of Egypt, a man so obsessed with his own PR that he carved his battle scenes into every available temple wall, from Cairo to Nubia. If you ask Ramses, he won single-handedly while flexing. If you ask the Hittites, they generously allowed him to leave alive. Historians still argue whether Kadesh was a draw, a retreat, or just an ego contest gone wildly over budget. But what's clear is that both sides got a wake-up call. The Hittites realized they couldn't keep throwing soldiers at Egypt, like clay tablets into a fireplace. And Egypt, despite its divine pharaohs and eyeliner game, knew it couldn't outlast the Hittite network of alliances and trade routes. You ride at the rear of a supply train. Not glamorous, but safer than the front lines. You pass men patching broken wheel spokes with rawhide, and chewing dried lentils like it's gourmet. The ground shakes periodically from practice runs, charioteers doing laps, like NASCAR drivers fueled by barley beer. Then you arrive at a massive tent compound. Part command center, or some spazen, or sick high sphinxes. Part bureaucratic nightmare. Here, the diplomats huddle, not in armor, but in layered robes and suspiciously tall headwear. They study maps, scribble cuneiform notes, and send runners back and forth with messages that read like, "To the king, my brother, please advise on the deployment of 10 additional oxen, and whether we may honor the truce this afternoon before supper. This is where peace first simmers, long before it's declared, not in palaces or temples, but in field tents where both sides realize we cannot do this again." You're handed a clay fragment, part of an intercepted Egyptian missive. It's written in haste, smudged, and panicked. The phrase "reinforcements delayed" appears 3 times. You exchange a knowing glance with your fellow envoy. This is your leverage. And this is how Hittite diplomacy really worked. Not with brute force, but with timely information and theatrical patience. Let the other guy sweat. Let the sun bake the battlefield. Let the silence win. Now here's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Supper or some friend. The Hittites may have faked a surrender tactic before Kadesh, pretending to retreat and leaving behind captured scouts who misled the Egyptians into a trap. Essentially, they invented the psychological ambush. And Ramses, he fell for it, hard. Some say he cried. Others say he just shouted his own name until help arrived. But it didn't matter in the end. No city was taken. No lands were gained. Only bodies and broken chariots littered the ground. And both armies limped home, spinning different stories. So, how do you turn that into peace? You go home. You gather your scribes, your priests, your most patient negotiators, and you start a letter. To Ramses, king of Egypt, my brother. The gods have smiled upon our lands. Let us walk the path of eternal friendship. As his vanity sealed under the eyes of 1,000 gods. You dip your stylus into wet clay. The words come slow, deliberate, and oddly poetic, for 2 kings who just tried to murder each other. But that's the Bronze Age way. The clay tablet you help compose includes detailed agreements, borders, trade rights, extradition clauses, and yes, marriage alliances. Ramses ends up marrying a Hittite princess, though whether she had a choice in the matter is, well, unlikely. The famous Treaty of Kadesh would later be found in both Hittite and Egyptian versions, each slightly different. One calls Ramses beloved of Amun. The other prefers Muwatalli's divine favor. It's a masterclass in mutually agreeable delusion. You sit back as the scribe recites the final lines. Both kings vow peace. They agree not to support each other's enemies. They promise divine retribution if the treaty is broken. And, classic move, they invoke the gods to witness the contract. The list includes the sun god, the storm god, a few fertility spirits, and possibly one very judgmental sheep. The seals are pressed. The tablet is dried. A copy is made for transport to Egypt, carefully packed in straw and wrapped in oilskin, like a religious relic. Because it kind of is. You walk past the chariots, now parked like tired beasts in the shade. Soldiers clean their gear, laugh quietly, and sneak bites of fig cakes. The war is over, for now, and as you drift away from the battlefield, one last fact settles in your mind. Like ash on the wind, the Hittites didn't win through weapons. They won by making sure the story that stuck, the treaty, the oaths, the sheep fat rituals, outlived the noise of battle. You awaken beneath a sky draped in gold. Dawn again, or maybe it's just the ceremonial canopy swaying above your head. You're seated this time, not in a war tent, but in something far stranger. A space neither battlefield nor palace. A theater of politics. Around you, banners ripple. Incense curls upward, like snakes returning to heaven. And no one says a word. Because today, peace isn't just declared, it's performed. Hittite diplomacy has no concept of quick handshakes and press conferences. No, this is the Bronze Age, where you prove your sincerity by standing still for hours and blinking as little as humanly possible. It's like diplomacy crossed with endurance theater. You sit alongside envoys from Egypt, Mitanni, Ugarit, and half a dozen vassal kingdoms you barely heard of. Everyone's dressed to intimidate. Layered robes with stitched animals, copper diadems shaped like crescent moons. And, for reasons you cannot explain, one man wearing sandals laced up to his armpits. Still, no one speaks. In front of you, the altar flickers with ceremonial fire. It's smoke laced with juniper, sauce rosemary, and probably a dash of dried sheep fat for good luck. The performers, because that's what they are, begin their silent ritual. One steps forward, arms raised. Another kneels and offers a bowl of barley. A third sprinkles crimson powder in a slow circle. This isn't magic. It's semiotic warfare. Every gesture is a clause. Every pause is a negotiation. Every awkward silence is a warning shot wrapped in velvet. The air is tense but calm, like the hush before a solar eclipse. And somewhere behind you, someone sneezes. An aide elbows him sharply. That sneeze might have just cost your side a trade concession. Mainstream fact incoming: Hittite ceremonies were choreographed, with a precision rivaling military campaigns. They believed peace required not just words, but atmosphere, bad omens, like a dog barking during a vow, or a bowl cracking mid-ritual, could delay talks for weeks. There's even a tablet where a priest blames a failed negotiation on a badly timed owl. And if you think this is all for show, think again. At least 2 recorded Hittite treaties were nullified due to improper ceremonial protocol. Nurido, just divine disapproval, and another 5 years of skirmishes. You try to focus on the present. The scene unfolds in surreal slowness. The high priestess lays her hands on a bound bundle of herbs, lifts it, then places it, delicately, onto a slab beside a carved lion statue. She withdraws. Everyone leans forward half an inch. Even the goats tied to a post at the back seem intrigued. And here's a fringe theory that scholars still argue about. Some believe these rituals doubled as loyalty tests, that each participant was being watched. Not by the gods, but by spies planted in the audience. A twitch, a frown, a hint of side-eye during the moment of vow. It could end a career, or a kingdom. Your stomach rumbles softly. You haven't eaten since dawn yesterday. You are, however, offered a drink. Some kind of fermented date wine, served in a terracotta cup shaped like a pig. It's thick, sour, and clings to your throat like regret. No one speaks. Still. Then the drummers begin. Just one at first. A slow heartbeat thud. Then another joins in. The rhythm is precise, almost mathematical. It pulses through your bones like a countdown. You realize you're sweating, not from heat. From focus. This is not boredom. This is warfare reimagined. Patience as a blade, endurance as a shield. Finally, a figure in a red and gold robe steps forward. You recognize him. He's the Egyptian translator, who once yelled at a tree because it looked like a Hittite official. Theatrics are his comfort zone. He speaks just 2 words in Akkadian. Peace, offered. That's your cue. Your own envoy rises, bows low, and responds, it's received. The crowd exhales, like they've all been holding their breath since last spring. And still, the ritual is not over. Now the performance moves into its closing act, the binding walk. Both envoys, barefoot and flanked by sacred goats, must walk 7 paces side by side, across a path made of painted tiles. Each tile bears an emblem: grain, sun, sheep, sword, eye, moon, river. If one of them steps on the wrong tile, it's considered a cosmic insult. You watch as they move, slowly, nervously, with the tension of a tightrope act over divine lava. Their heels brush the correct symbols. The goats bleat exactly twice. That's a good sign. Quirky detail alert. The binding walk tiles are rumored to have been painted using a mix of crushed minerals, flower dyes, and the ash of previous failed treaties. Recycling, Bronze Age style. The envoys reach the end. They stop. No applause, just silence. And then Rebecca bell rings. One deep toll from a bronze disc hung above the altar. Now the audience responds, with one gesture and in perfect unison. Right hand over heart, left hand to the ground. A pledge, not just to the treaty, to the act of peace itself. And this is the Hittite genius. They don't just make peace. They build a religion out of it. Not because they're naive, but because they know that fear alone can't hold an empire. You need faith, even if it's performative. The high priestess steps forward, raises a small carved box, and opens it. Inside, 2 tablets sealed with fat and inscribed with the agreed terms. She lifts one, hands it to the Egyptian envoy. The other is placed on the altar, where it will later be enshrined. The performance ends. There's no curtain, just a slow fade. As people begin to leave, eyes still wide, mouths still silent. You rise too, body stiff from stillness. The crowd disperses, but the silence lingers. A heavy, deliberate quiet, like the echo of something ancient being laid to rest, or something fragile being born. You glance back one more time. The altar glows in the last light of dusk. Somewhere, a goat sneezes. This time, no one flinches. You're walking back to your tent now, down a flag-lined corridor of trampled grass and freshly dumped incense ash. Everyone's talking again, softly, cautiously, but the ceremony still clings to your mind like dust. Not just because of the goats or the barley wine, but because of the silence, that elusive strategic pause in the Hittite world, where stillness speaks louder than declarations. You're beginning to understand. It isn't just a quirk of their culture. It's a tactic, a tool, a language in its own right. The Hittites have a term that roughly translates to holy restraint. And when they enter negotiations, they lean into it like a sculptor leans into stone, chipping away not with arguments, but with pauses, glances, and very deliberate eye contact. If you're talking, you're revealing. If you're silent, you're shaping. You arrive at a small pavilion for dinner. A plate of flatbread, barch lentils, and dates is waiting. Nothing fancy, but still served with care. You sit cross-legged, watching the other envoys eat in near silence. Not because they're tired, because they're listening to the room, to each other, to the thud of distant drums, and the occasional bleat from the ceremonial goat pen. Historians still argue whether the Hittite reliance on silence was born from religious conviction or just brilliant statecraft. Either way, it worked. One ancient tablet even advises, if your enemy speaks with speed, answer him with stillness. Let his words fall and scatter before your reply. This makes you think back to a moment from earlier, a simple nod from a Mitanni envoy across the room. It wasn't just polite, it was calculated. Hittite silence has layers. A tilted chin can signal concession. A full minute of not blinking? That's practically a declaration of terms. Here's your mainstream fact. The Hittite diplomatic corps were often trained from childhood, taught not only multiple languages, Akkadian, Sumerian, Hittite, but also nonverbal cues, hand gestures, ritual stances. Even the weight of eye contact had prescribed meanings. Picture a room full of silent negotiators, out staring each other, until someone blinks and accidentally agrees to a trade route. Even the scroll bearers, the lowest of the court functionaries, were expected to know when not to breathe too loudly. One wrong exhale during a critical pause, and you might derail negotiations. Or worse, get reassigned to goat washing duty for a season. And here's the weird tidbit. Some treaties even included a silence clause. This required both parties to observe a period of agreed-upon stillness before the treaty could be ratified. 10 hours, 12, sometimes an entire day. They called it the cool period, not because it was trendy, but because it supposedly cooled tempers and invited the gods to weigh in while humans stayed quiet. You're beginning to appreciate the beauty of this tactic. In the modern world, we talk our way through everything, defend, explain, over-clarify. But here, in the flickering half-light of a Hittite diplomatic camp, not speaking is a superpower. You finish your meal. A servant offers you honeyed water, and you accept with a silent nod. The sun is lowering now, brushing the sky with that watercolor bleed of bronze and violet. The ceremonial fires are lit again. Not bright, just glowing enough to cast long shadows of the shrine statues. You walk past one, a carved basalt figure of a storm god, holding a crooked staff and a sheep at his feet. The god has no mouth, just a wide, all-seeing eye, a reminder that divinity hears, but doesn't always answer. Back in your tent, a junior scribe lights a fat-soaked wick and sets it in a clay dish. The smell is pungent, somewhere between burnt almonds and last week's stew, but it calms you. It's the smell of history being made. You sit, you wait. A messenger arrives with a sealed clay envelope. Inside, a tablet no larger than your hand. It contains 3 lines in Akkadian. The silence has been kept. The gods have seen it. The agreement will be recited at sunrise. Prepare your mouth, but only then. You smile at that last line. Prepare your mouth. as if it's a weapon that's been sheathed too long, or a gate about to open, and let the treaty tumble out like water behind a dam. And here's what nobody tells you. Silence is exhausting, more so than shouting. You feel it in your shoulders, your jaw, even your spine. Holding still, holding quiet. It takes discipline, precision, faith. Outside your tent, two guards whisper something to each other in the native Hittite tongue. You don't catch the words, but you hear the pause between them. That weighted moment of nothing. You're starting to think silence was the Hittites' secret weapon, not just in diplomacy, but in empire building. When you wait, really wait, you hear what others miss. The slippage in tone, the forced laughter, the crack in someone's voice when they claim their king is fine, their city loyal. Tomorrow, you'll speak, carefully, and the words will matter because you've earned the right to say them through silence. That's the rule. That's the ritual. You lie back on a woven mat and stare at the canopy above. Embroidered constellations, stitched with thread, dipped in lamb's blood and copper dust. You wonder if one of those stars is watching this moment, not because it's loud or violent or triumphant, but because it's quiet and sacred. You close your eyes, and in the silence, you realize you've never felt more heard. You're woken by the low whumph of coals being stirred, and the faint crackle of pine resin catching fire. The sun isn't up yet, but the ceremonial tent is already aglow, pulsing with shadows that look like the ghosts of yesterday's oaths. You stretch days reluctantly, because today is Sheep Fat Day. No, not a festival, not a feast, not even a spa treatment. It's the day when the treaty is made official, not just through words, not even through silence, but through the sacred application of rendered sheep fat. Because in Hittite diplomacy, nothing is truly sealed until it's sealed with semi-melted animal goo. You approach the central altar, now repurposed into a workbench of sorts. The priest-chemist, an older man who looks like he's been dipped in beeswax, gestures solemnly toward two steaming clay bowls. Inside, a viscous yellowish substance, with the consistency of lukewarm pudding, and the smell of, well, regret. Mainstream fact, sheep fat was commonly used in the ancient Near East for ritual purposes. It burned clean, absorbed scents, and was considered a bridge between earthly and divine. The Hittites took this further, believing treaties needed to be bound, with fat from a lamb, that had not been sheared, touched by disease, or looked directly at the moon. Seriously, one glance at the moon, and that sheep was off the table. You watch as attendants carry in the prepared animal, calm, perfumed, tomato, and possibly the best-fed creature, in a 100-mile radius. Its fat was rendered overnight, stirred with dried herbs, honeys, and a drop of sacrificial wine. The resulting paste is both symbolic and strangely versatile. It will be used to anoint the clay tablets, seal the edges, and lubricate the styluses used for final inscription. Yeah, nothing escapes the fat. A scribe begins to chant, slowly, rhythmically, as the main negotiators kneel at either side of the stone slab. The tablet rests between them, blank still, waiting for words. But first, the fat. Using a carved wooden ladle, the priest scoops the golden substance and pours a slow, deliberate line down the center of the slab. A second line follows along the top edge. This forms a border, a greasy, fragrant fence within which the treaty must be written. Step outside that line, and it's a cosmic foul. Now comes the quirky part. The actual application is done with a sheep's femur bone, smoothed down, polished, and shaped into what looks unsettlingly like a spatula. According to fringe tradition, using metal would offend the earth goddess. Using your hand, blasphemy. But a bone? That's just intimate enough. You notice the atmosphere shift as the bone touches the tablet. The crowd leans in, not to read, but to feel. This is the moment the gods notice, maybe even get involved. One priestess begins to hum softly, an eerie sliding melody meant to calm the air. Meanwhile, a second assistant brings out a pouch of powdered ochre and dabs the corners of the slab, blending the fat with pigment. The treaty, you realize, is being painted into existence. You stand still, awed, slightly nauseated, and suddenly very aware of how serious these people are about their binding substances. You whisper to the envoy beside you, "Is this much fat always necessary?" She answers without looking away, "Only if we want the gods to remember." That's the thing. This isn't about your memory. It's about divine memory. The Hittites believed that the fat of a pure sheep mixed with sacred words and sealed beneath firelight would echo into eternity, not metaphorically, literally. They thought gods tasted these promises through scent and smoke. You shift your weight and try not to sneeze. One false breath during the anointing, and you might earn a decade of curses, or worse, have to start over. The treaty is now ready for writing. The scribes begin their work, careful not to smear the fat borders. The styluses dipped lightly in oil and warmed beside the fire, press cuneiform into the clay, like soft pecks of permanence. Each wedge, each stroke, is deliberate. The words aren't just recorded, they're entombed. And here's something even scholars can't agree on. Some believe these rituals were exaggerated for effect. Others argue the ceremonies were tightly codified and repeated exactly the same way for centuries. One theory suggests that the performance of the ritual itself carried more legal weight than the content of the treaty. In other words, it mattered more how you sealed the deal than what you agreed to. Once the tablet is filled, two smaller plaques are brought out. These are the vow tablets, miniature versions of the agreement containing only the divine invocations and punishment clauses. Think of them as Bronze Age fine print. These will be kept in temples, buried under statues, or tucked into the walls of city gates, so the gods and possibly nosy passersby can keep tabs. The fat makes one last appearance. A final smear is made across the finished treaty. This time, the priest presses a medallion into the center, an emblem of the storm god, holding a sheep in one hand and a stylus in the other. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's legally binding. You step back, dizzy from the heat and heady scent of scorched herbs. But, you've just witnessed something more than bureaucracy. You've seen an empire hardwire its promises into the very elements. Earth, air, and sheep. A runner dashes past, with a basket of rosewater-soaked cloths. You wipe your hands, your brow, your sandals. Even after all that, the smell of the fat lingers in your nose. Peace, it seems, has a texture, a scent, a shine. And just before the tablet is stored, in its ceremonial case, lined with cedar shavings and wrapped in wool, a young novice scribe leans over and whispers a blessing. May the gods forget nothing, and may we forget nothing they remember. You've been summoned again, this time not to a battlefield or a performance, or a blood-soaked altar. No, tonight you enter the hush of a diplomatic tent. So dense with incense and tension, you half expect to see words hanging in the air like smoke. It's not war they're making now, it's details. You duck inside and instantly feel the temperature shift. Cooler, almost damp, like the breath of damp linen and centuries-old secrets. The tent is large but intimate, dimly lit by polished bronze reflectors, bouncing firelight around the space. No torches here. Open flames are forbidden in this inner sanctum of diplomacy. At the center sits a low table inlaid with lapis and mother of pearl. A shallow tray of water glimmers beneath it, catching reflections of the men and women sitting cross-legged all around. The idea, you're told, is that if the water ripples too much, someone's lying, or possibly just nervous. Either way, the water's watching. You sit beside your delegation. Robes are looser here, voices barely above a whisper. This is the tent of terms, where treaties are sculpted clause by painstaking clause. And believe it or not, one of the scribes is chewing a licorice root dipped in sheep fat to soothe his throat. No one comments. The lead negotiator begins to speak, not loudly and not confidently, but like someone carving through clay with a feather. The topic, trade routes. More specifically, who gets to control the grain supply through the Arzawa corridor, a strip of land narrow enough to cause 40 years of conflict, and wide enough to feed 4 kingdoms. Mainstream fact, the Hittites often held negotiations inside tents like these, rather than palaces or temples. Why? Mobility, yes, but also neutrality. A tent could be placed between borders, on disputed soil, on sacred ground, wherever the gods and the warhorses dared not tread too heavily. And this tent, it's treated almost like a living being. Its ropes are wrapped with red thread to bind hostile winds. The poles are rubbed with oil from 7 herbs. Even the floor mats are arranged in spirals, meant to confuse malicious spirits or overly ambitious aides. Across the table, the other envoy speaks, not a rebuttal, a clarification. The tent goes still. A priest dips a stylus into ink and draws a quick symbol on a wax tablet, 3 strokes and a tiny dot. It means discuss further, but not tonight. You suppress a grin. This treaty may take a week at this rate. But then something shifts. One of the vassal kings, probably half drunk on fermented goat milk, interrupts loudly. His voice booms through the fabric, like a thunderclap in a library. Everyone freezes. The lead priest turns his head ever so slowly. His gaze lands on the interrupter like frostbite. The tent creaks, the fire gutters low, and in that one frozen moment, a decision is made. The offender must leave. He's escorted out with solemnity, not scorn. To stay in the tent is to show control. Lose that, and you're no longer a negotiator. You're a disruption. Might as well be a wild boar rooting through the archives. Here comes the quirky detail. Hittite tents were acoustically tuned. Seriously, animal hides of different thickness were hung behind the negotiators to absorb unwanted echoes. Some even had weighted curtains that could be drawn mid-talk to muffle gossip or let a deity eavesdrop. It's like an early prototype of a soundproof conference room, minus the PowerPoint. Your delegation regroups. A steward brings in warm cloths soaked in juniper water, meant to restore clarity. You dab at your face and inhale. It helps, sort of. Now comes the naming ceremony. Not for people, for the treaty itself. The scribes suggest titles like The Pact of Shared Plenty, Words Beneath the Olive Tree, Covenant of the Two Rivers. Each one is more poetic than the last. One even suggests it's friendship in the shadow of storms. A bit dramatic, sure, but no one dares laugh. The name must evoke harmony, without implying submission. Both sides must feel equally exalted, and slightly superior. Eventually, a consensus forms around a name. The accord of salt and grain. Salt, the preserver. Grain, the nourisher. Together it says, we won't fight as long as our tables are full. And just when you think the meeting's winding down, the tent's rear flap opens, and in walks a figure cloaked head to toe, face veiled, bearing a sealed clay jar. A hush. This is the queen's envoy, not a diplomat, not a priest, a messenger of the highest household. She places the jar on the table and bows. Inside, likely wine, or a perfume, or more sheep fat. Honestly, anything is possible at this point. But the message is clear. The queen herself supports the treaty. That single gesture, her seal stamped in beeswax on the jar's rim, adds the weight of royal domesticity. The palace approves. The household gods nod. The treaties will hold. Historians still argue whether these appearances by cloaked envoys were symbolic or carried actual negotiation weight. Some say they were messengers of blessings. Others believe they delivered veiled warnings. This deal better be good, or someone's sleeping outside the city walls. As the envoy exits, a flute begins to play softly. A signal. Talks are paused for the night. You rise. Your knees crack audibly. You bow toward the tray of water, which mercifully remains still. No ripples. No lies. Outside, the stars are bright. The wind is soft, and you realize that while treaties are written in words, they're built in moments like this, in the flick of a stylus, the tilt of a head, the silence between two breaths. The tent behind you shimmers, lit from within like a lantern of peace. Temporary, beautiful, sacred. The morning comes with a different kind of ritual. No drumming, no chants, no goats and ceremonial ribbons. Today you ride, you mount a sturdy sun-leathered horse, and follow the envoy train down a winding valley trail, flanked by cypress and stone. The treaty has been drafted. The silence has been honored. Now comes the exchange, not just of words and tablets, but of things far shinier, heavier, and sometimes awkwardly alive. Because what's a peace treaty without a few gift baskets that weigh as much as a mid-sized ox? You arrive at the ceremonial gift enclosure, a roped-off area of flat ground with wooden platforms, shaded by linen canopies, guarded by men in kilts made of silver discs that jingle like tambourines when they move. The air smells of saffron, oiled leather, and faintly honey. Always honey. The Hittites believed that gifting was the glue that held a treaty together. A nice little postscript that said, I still don't trust you, but please enjoy this chest of gold, and 36 jars of fermented goat yogurt. Your delegation unloads first. Out come carved cedar boxes packed with dyed wool, ingots of tin wrapped in rush mats, a small chest of turquoise beads, and a very confused peacock. Mainstream fact, Ancient diplomacy often included elaborate gift exchanges that weren't just generous, they were strategic. Sending gold could signify respect. Sending a rare animal implied exotic influence. Sending something mediocre could be interpreted as an insult. There's a recorded case where one king sent a lapdog instead of war horses, and the other side called off the marriage alliance. Your peacock squawks indignantly, and someone tosses it a fig. It's clearly not impressed. A scribe takes careful note of everything handed over. Weight, shape, even which envoy's hand actually placed it on the gift mat. Symbolism matters. A misstep in the choreography can be interpreted as arrogance or weakness. And then comes their turn. The Egyptian delegation approaches with slaves hauling baskets of papyrus scrolls, vials of perfume sealed with wax, a model boat carved from obsidian, and, because of course, a pair of gold-encrusted sandals that probably cost more than a small province. Also included a set of musicians. Yes, musicians. Real people, dressed in lapis-colored robes, carrying lyres and reed flutes. Not just as entertainment, but as part of the gift itself. These men and women will be loaned to the Hittite court for a season to teach their styles and perform its ceremonies. It's cultural diplomacy with a musical score. You stifle a laugh. When one Hittite noble whispers, "We should have sent the dancing goats." Now comes the weighing. Literally, each gift is placed on a carved stone scale. It's not just about fairness, it's about sacred balance. The gods, they say, watch the scales. And if they tip too far in one direction, someone's getting cursed. Quirky tidbit for you. One scribe's notes from a treaty ceremony include complaints about the other side, sending the gold plated with false luster, and a jar of dates so dry they could strike a flint. Diplomacy, it seems, has always had room for petty Yelp reviews. As the gifts are displayed, you spot an odd addition, a young woman in a silk veil, seated on a stool beside the musicians. She's not a servant, she's a bride. Or, more accurately, a token of alliance, a noble daughter given in ceremonial marriage, to cement the treaty. You shift uncomfortably. She looks calm, composed. But you wonder if she knows the fine print. If she knows that in a few days, she'll be riding across enemy lands, toward a new home, a new temple, and a new life entirely decided by who blinked first during a negotiation. Historians still argue whether these political marriages were voluntary, strategic, or quietly resented behind every palace curtain. Most likely, all of the above. Sometimes a royal bride arrived with her own guards and fortune. Sometimes she arrived alone, with nothing but a seal ring and a nervous smile. As the bride rises, both envoys bow deeply. A priest steps forward and smears a dab of sheep fat onto the pommel of her saddle, because of course he does. Even this union must be witnessed by the gods of meat and memory. You try to meet her eye. She doesn't return the glance. Not out of fear, out of discipline. She knows this is a performance. She plays her part flawlessly. After the exchange, a formal inspection of satisfaction takes place. That's the actual phrase used in some treaties. Inspectors from both sides walk the perimeter, sniff the perfumes, tap the gold, taste the wine. One elderly man even licks a scroll for authenticity. You pretend not to notice. Once confirmed, the scribe approaches, with a final note on his wax tablet. The gifts received, oaths honored, balance preserved. A bell chimes, struck with a sheep femur again. Because by now, of course it is. The chime signals the next step, feast preparations. But before you leave the gift enclosure, your envoy tugs at your sleeve. He gestures toward a quiet table, where a box has just been placed. Small, unlabeled, unopened. Inside, no one knows. Not yet. It's a private gift, meant only for your king. Something too delicate for the stage. You lean in. There's a faint scent. Cedar, mint, and smoke? Whatever it is, it smells like secrets. Later that evening, the air takes on a velvety stillness, as the gift tent is replaced by banquet tables and braziers glowing amber. You follow the train of envoys and scribes toward the ceremonial feast pavilion, but your mind is elsewhere. Back at that quiet box, the one that smelled of cedar, mint, and something more cryptic. It's unopened, locked with a seal bearing a woman's sigil. Not a king's, not a priest's, a woman's. You'll learn soon enough. Hittite diplomacy may be a man's performance on the surface, but behind the scenes, it's often the women who hold the puppeteer strings. Tonight, you dine under a roof of stars. and tightly woven linen, the fabric embroidered with constellations, only visible from Anatolia. A flute plays softly in the distance. Dates stuffed with walnuts are passed around, on gold plates shaped like lotus petals. It's easy to forget this feast is only happening because two kingdoms almost annihilated each other over river access. As you chew thoughtfully, your gaze catches a figure across the pavilion. A woman seated in a semicircle of scribes, priests, and silent guards. She's wearing a copper circlet that glints like fire, and a gown dyed deep indigo, so rare it might as well be stitched from starlight. She's not introduced. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. That's Queen Puduhepa. You're told in a whisper. Priestess of Ishtar, wife of King Hattusili III. More importantly, she's one of the most politically savvy minds the Bronze Age ever produced. She wrote letters to pharaohs. She ordered copies of treaties. She edited clauses. She may have even dictated parts of the Kadesh Treaty itself. Mainstream fact, Queen Puduhepa is the only ancient Near Eastern queen we know of who co-signed international treaties as an equal party. Her name appears in Akkadian and Hittite tablets, alongside kings. She negotiated marriages, appointed priests, and even had input on border conflicts. She was diplomacy incarnate, wrapped in silk, and perfectly timed glances. And here's the fringe bit. There's a theory among some scholars that she employed her own network of whisper scribes, women trained not in swordplay, but in observation and influence. They attended meetings, poured wine, lit lamps, and memorized everything. You sip something sweet and spiced, date wine with saffron, maybe a touch of myrrh, and scan the room. Suddenly, the veiled woman from earlier, the envoy bearing the sealed box, appears again. She walks past you, deliberately slow. No words, but she drops a thin clay token at your feet. You pick it up. It bears the symbol of a hand cupping a flame, Puduhepa's mark. Later that night, by flickering oil lamp, you crack the seal on the box. Inside, a folded square of dyed linen, a miniature bronze mirror, and a small palm-sized tablet. Not a treaty, a list. Names, dates, events. And at the bottom, a phrase in neat, clean Akkadian. She knows who listens, and she remembers who forgets. You sit back, your breath caught somewhere between awe and dread. This isn't just diplomacy. It's surveillance. It's legacy. It's insurance. Because when a queen whispers into history, she doesn't shout. She doesn't threaten. She prepares. The next morning, you're summoned again. Not to the tent, not to the shrine, but to the archives. There, Queen Puduhepa is seated among scribes, and she's reading your name aloud. No flourish. No accusation. Just a calm inquiry. Were the dates in last season's tribute shipment accurate? You freeze. Nod slowly. Yes, my queen. She smiles. Barely. Good. Oh, I like those who remember details. What follows isn't an interrogation. It's a debrief. She asks questions, sharp ones, about Egyptian imports, the quality of barley from Ugarit, the morale of scribes from Carchemish. She records nothing, but you know she's memorizing everything. And here comes another surprise. She doesn't ask about war. She asks about peace. Real peace. The kind you have to build like a temple, stone by painful stone, breath by deliberate breath. Do you think this treaty will hold? She asks. You pause, uncertain if truth or optimism is safer. I think it might. She nods once. Then we will have to outlive its failure. That's the thing about women in Hittite diplomacy. They didn't just prop up the throne. They extended it, whispered behind it, reinforced it with memory and persistence, and very, very sharp insight. You leave the archives both lighter and more burdened. Somehow you become part of her system, a node in the web she weaves, between oaths, marriages, sealed boxes, and tea-sipping, sharp-eyed matrons. Outside, the feast has shifted to dance. Musicians play fast, chaotic melodies, while children duck between torchlight, and visiting dignitaries try not to trip on tent ropes. It's almost joyous. Almost. But you can't stop thinking about the women who made this happen. Queens, priestesses, scribes, and silent shadows who knew too much and showed too little. One of them passes you now. You recognize her. She lit a lamp beside Queen Puduhepa earlier. She smiles faintly and mouths a word you almost don't catch. Remember, dawn again. You've lost count of how many sunrises you've witnessed in this valley of oaths and offerings. But today is different. Today, You witness the recital of a promise meant to echo for generations, the Treaty of Kadesh. You're summoned before breakfast, gently but firmly, by a scribe who looks like he hasn't blinked since the moon changed phases. He leads you through the perfumed alleys of the ceremonial quarter toward a domed pavilion that smells like old ink, burnt myrrh, and legal anxiety. Inside, it's quiet, not the reverent silence of ritual, more like the thick hush of an archive coming alive. Along the pavilion's walls are hung massive linen scrolls, each bearing a stylized depiction of one of the treaty's main clauses. Iconic, almost cartoonish, hands clasped in friendship, a storm god glaring down on fleeing soldiers, a sheep standing between two lions. Front and center rests the star of the show, the Akkadian tablet of the Kadesh Treaty, the very one your scribes and Egypt's best negotiators have spent months drafting, reciting, and anointing with approximately 7 gallons of sheep fat. Mainstream fact, the Treaty of Kadesh, signed around 1259 BCE between Ramses II and Haile III, is considered the world's oldest surviving peace treaty. A copy was even found on a wall in the Temple of Karnak, and its Hittite version, etched into clay, was discovered in the archives of Hadassah. It was revolutionary not just for its parody, but for its specificity. You take your place among the inner circle. Today's ceremony isn't dramatic like the oath rituals. This is quieter, more dangerous. This is when the words are spoken out loud. And if they are mispronounced, omitted, or embellished, well, the gods are listening. And they keep receipts. A scribe steps forward with the tablet, cradled like a newborn. Another follows with a small brazier, where a mixture of myrtle, sheep's milk, and powdered lapis burns in solemn spirals. The smoke rises. The reading begins. Each line is drawn out with rhythmic pauses, a vocal dance between precision and reverence. The reader doesn't just say the words, he performs them. A wrong inflection could change a clause, from shall not raid to shall now raid. And let's just say that typo could start a war. The room breathes in sync. You hear phrases like, as Ra lives and Teshub strikes, there shall be no aggression, and if rebels flee from one kingdom to the other, they shall be returned. If either king breaks this treaty, may the 1,000 gods of oath tear down his house, his name, his grain, and the sandals on his feet. Subtle, but firm. And now comes your quirky moment. Mid-recitation, the scribe stops and turns to the Egyptian envoy. There's a clause requiring confirmation of the exchange of sacred dogs. Yes, dogs. Trained hounds were apparently part of the peace, either as gifts or as early warning systems. The Egyptian blinks. We agreed on goats. A tense pause. Scribes shuffle through wax tablets. One leans in and whispers, "It was corrected in version 5. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Both dogs and goats will be offered, just to be safe." The gods, apparently, are not known for flexible reading comprehension. Once the full treaty is read aloud, no interruptions, no skipped lines. The tablet is placed on a pedestal. The pedestal is then coated with a new layer of sheep fat, this time infused with cedar ash and crushed berries. Why, no one knows, but it smells divine. And here's where things get interesting. A backup tablet is presented. This one is smaller, portable. It's meant to be taken back to Egypt by Ramses' delegation. But the big question, how will it be protected on the journey? You lean in as a debate unfolds, not with words, but with gestures, grunts, and exaggerated shrugs. One side wants to wrap it in lambskin. The other insists on a cedar box filled with barley. A third voice suggests hollowing out a bread loaf and hiding the tablet inside. Fringe theory alert, some scholars believe that diplomatic tablets were occasionally disguised as food or wrapped in dried fish to avoid theft during travel. Whether or not that's true, it does explain the oddly fishy smell that lingers around some surviving records. In the end, the tablet is placed in a wax-sealed container shaped like a bird, likely a goose, though it might also be a very confused swan. The goose box is then handed off to a royal guard, who looks like he could crack walnuts with his teeth. He salutes, turns, and begins the long walk east. The ceremony winds down with no music, no dancing, just one final sentence, spoken by both delegations in unison. What is spoken here today shall live in the silence of the gods. You exhale. The weight of it all presses into your shoulders. This wasn't a show. It was a vow, one meant to outlive kings, dynasties, and even the languages in which it was written. As you walk out into the afternoon sun, a scribe catches up to you. He presses a slip of parchment into your hand. You unfold it. One line. Treaty recorded. Now we must live like we believe it. Simple. Stern. Impossible. The days after the treaty's recital are supposed to be calm, but peace is a skittish guest in the Bronze Age. And tonight, under a sky heavy with smoke and tension, you begin to understand just how fragile these oaths can be. The tents flap restlessly in the wind. The animals are jumpy. Even the guards, normally statues in sandals, shift more than usual. Something's off. You feel it like a splinter beneath your thoughts. This was supposed to be a rest day. Feasting, storytelling, maybe a sacrificial song or two. Instead, you're summoned again to the pavilion. Not to write, not to speak, to watch. A dispute has broken out between two minor envoys. You barely know their names. One is from a Hittite vassal city near the Halis River. The other, a smirking courtier from a buffer kingdom tied to Egypt. Apparently, someone insulted someone else's goat. Or wife, possibly both. You enter the tent and immediately feel the heat. Not physical heat, emotional. Thick, rolling, ambient hostility. The goat is there too, surprisingly. Standing just outside the pavilion, looking very proud of itself. The lead priests are already trying to calm things. But there's no silence in this room. Only clipped phrases, controlled fury. And lots of phrases like, with all due reverence, followed by clear threats. You sit down quietly and brace for the unraveling. Mainstream fact. Many treaties, especially those with multiple signatories, relied on the cooperation of minor players, not just kings, and those minor players often had major egos. One insulted noble, one wrong clause, and the entire agreement could collapse faster than a mud brick under siege. The Hittites knew this. That's why they scheduled ritual cooling days like this one. Time for tempers to settle, for egos to inflate in private, and for priests to hand out calming herbs steeped in goat milk. It usually worked. Usually. Today, not so much. As tensions flare, the high priest of Ishtar takes charge. He doesn't shout. He doesn't demand. He walks slowly, barefoot, between the feuding envoys, with a bowl of black powder. He sprinkles a line down the center of the floor and murmurs a phrase in Hattic. Let the line hold before the mind breaks. That line, it's sacred. Cross it in anger, and you don't just insult the negotiation, you insult the gods. Historians still argue whether this powder was merely symbolic, or laced with herbs known to induce calmness, or even mild hallucinations. Either way, it works. The men step back. The goat sneezes. The line holds. You exhale, thinking the crisis is over. But then, because peace is dramatic, another problem arises. One of the date deliveries is spoiled. Not a big deal, right? Wrong. Dates are symbolic. Sweetness offered in peace. A crate of fermented mush? That smells like insult. Or worse, sabotage. Cue the parade of accusations. Someone suggests the dates were stored in a tent that had been used for sacrificial blood rituals. Someone else suggests the Egyptian envoy deliberately sent low-quality fruit to test Hittite hospitality. You sip a very tense cup of water as the room again tilts toward chaos. And now, your quirky tidbit. There are records of food items, yes, food, being the subject of formal diplomatic clauses. One surviving tablet even includes a section on the acceptable ripeness of figs during seasonal exchanges. A clause that reads, and we're not kidding, the figs must be firm to the touch, but pleasing to the tooth. Back in the tent, the solution comes. Not from a priest, not a scribe, but from a woman. One of the same quiet robed assistants from Queen Puduhepa's court. She steps forward, offers a clean cloth, and places 2 fresh pomegranates on the disputed table. No explanation, no speech, just fruit placed with grace. The tension snaps. One envoy nods, the other smirks. The goat wanders off. That's how peace holds. Not through sweeping declarations, but through timely fruit and someone knowing when not to talk. Later that night, the firelight dances low. The feast resumes, a little subdued but no longer brittle. You sit with your scribe companion, the two passes you a note. When oaths are fresh, even a sneeze can start a war. But when they're worn in, you can joke about the goat. You laugh softly, carefully. You're learning the rhythm, the fragile tempo of new peace. And then, a moment of real unease. A runner arrives breathless. A border outpost reported a skirmish. Bandits. Maybe raiders. Maybe soldiers testing the edges of the new truce. Your envoy stiffens. Everyone watches the queen's tent, but no command comes. Not yet, only a flicker of light behind the canvas, and the sense that 100 calculations are already being made inside. Because here's the truth. Peace doesn't come with a parade. It arrives nervous, suspicious, always checking the windows. And sometimes, it takes more courage to let a minor violation go unpunished than to march an army down the valley. You go to bed that night with your sandals beside you, just in case. Outside, the goat is still awake, watching. You wake to the sound of drums, not the slow ceremonial kind, but a brisk tattoo that says someone's nervous, and someone else is probably missing. It's been days since the treaty was sealed, the sheep were sacrificed, the gifts exchanged. Peace is supposed to have settled over the camp like dew. Instead, you step outside your tent into a wind that smells like wet iron and impatience. A messenger approaches you, clutching a slate covered in streaky cuneiform. You read it slowly. It's from a Hittite garrison captain near the southern frontier. 3 villages have not paid tribute. 1 has hoisted Egyptian banners. You sigh. The treaty isn't even a week old, and already the cracks have begun to whisper. Oh, mainstream fact. Even after treaties like Kadesh were signed, peace was often more illusion than reality. Local rulers didn't always obey central command. Outposts were slow to receive word, and a suspiciously independent raid could be blamed on bandits, rebels, or the wind. Or, today's emergency meeting is smaller. No rituals, no sheep fat, just tight lips and half-empty cups of barley wine. You sit beside your envoy in a low pavilion shaded with papyrus, listening to phrases like, "If they fly the banners, they must declare allegiance." But they were starving. It was probably a bribe. If we retaliate, we violate the terms. But if we don't, we invite more defiance. Or, the queen doesn't attend, but her presence is felt. A polished stone bearing her seal sits on the center table, placed there like an eye that never blinks. A reminder. You're given a simple task. Deliver a warning. But not just any warning, a symbolic one. Which brings us to the quirky detail. The Hittites had a tradition called the echo warning. You'd send an envoy to the offending party carrying a carved replica of a prior treaty violation. Sometimes a clay model of a burned granary, or a broken stylus, or, in truly petty moments, a figurine of a goat with a bandaged leg. This hour, your team chooses a more elegant method. A sealed jug of water, clear, cold, pure. Tied to it, a message burned into wood. As the water reflects your face, so peace reflects your loyalty. Cloud it, and both vanish. Poetic, ominous, reusable, and you ride out with a small escort, just a handful of scribes, 2 guards, and a priest with the shoulders of a mason and the patience of a mountain. The journey is quiet. The land rolls gently around you, drowsy with wheat and sunlight. But beneath the beauty, you feel the tension. Villagers pause in their fields when they see your banner. Children hide behind doors. No one waves. The target village lies in a bend of the river. Its clay rooftops sun-bleached and patched with straw. There's no resistance, no violence, only silence and shame. You present the jug. You recite the clause. Ikrid, the village elder weeps. Not theatrically. Honestly, he apologizes. Explains, a merchant caravan from Egypt promised grain. The local storage houses were empty. The children were sick. You don't argue. You listen. And when he asks if he must still send 2 men to Hadassah as oath representatives, you pause. It's not required, but it might help. He agrees. A birth. Later that evening, back at the diplomatic camp, your envoy drafts a letter, not a threat, a reassurance. And this is the dance of post-treaty politics. How to be stern without sounding imperial. How to say, "We're watching," without reaching for your sword. Historians still argue whether this period, after the Kadesh Treaty, marked real peace or just a cold war of careful glances and polite raids. One tablet even suggests a Hittite ambassador was poisoned 6 months later, in an accidental honey wine incident. Accidental. Right. But for now, your measured response is met with approval. The queen sends you a fresh robe, dyed deep green, the color of olives and patience. A signal. You've done well. Then the night takes a strange turn. A second report arrives. A courier intercepted a letter. Not from Egypt, but from a rogue Mitanni noble. It's a call to disrupt the treaty, to fracture the alliance before it takes root. And attached to the letter, A single goat hair. Black, curled, tied with red thread. You glance toward the animal pen. The ceremonial goat, the one used in the binding walk, has vanished. Coincidence? Or symbolic vandalism? Oh, fringe theory time. Some scholars believe the Hittites used sacred animals not only in rituals, but as passive treaty monitors. If a treaty animal died, wandered off, or was harmed, it was seen as divine commentary. A few broken oaths in history were reportedly discovered, because the goat suddenly refused to eat. The queen acts swiftly. A single command goes out to all border governors. Strengthen your signals. Do not strike unless struck. Trust but confirm. You lie awake that night, staring at the tent's roof, listening for sounds that aren't there. The wind, the snort of a horse, the absence of a goat. The truth is, peace has a brittle edge. It can be cracked not just by armies, but by suspicion, gossip, silence where there should be laughter, one forgotten clause, one intercepted letter, a sect, and somewhere out there, beneath the same stars as you, a goat is missing. A treaty is shifting, and the next move might not come with a warning. You fall asleep with your sandals on, just in case. At sunrise, the city hums with purpose. Not joy, not fear, just that quiet churn of an empire doing what it does best, remembering. You walk through the gates of Hadassah again, this time with the treaty in tow. Not the original, mind you, but a masterfully pressed clay duplicate. It rests in a cedar case strapped to your back, like an unusually sacred knapsack, cushioned in wool, and a suspiciously large amount of rosemary sprigs. Your destination? The Hall of Memory. It's not marked on maps. There's no grand archway, just a downward sloping tunnel carved from cool limestone, hidden behind a wall of nondescript storerooms. Only scribes and priests pass this way, and you today. Oh, your sandals echo. The air smells like dust and dried herbs. The walls bear no decoration, only niches holding shelves upon shelves of tablets, some flat and smooth, others cracked and warped from age or neglect. They lean like sleeping soldiers, each one a frozen argument, a settled debt, a promise half kept. This is where the treaties go to sleep. Aid. Mainstream fact, Hattusa's archive system was legendary in its scope and organization. Over 30,000 clay tablets have been unearthed from its ruins. Administrative reports, religious hymns, diplomatic letters, and yes, peace treaties. They were sorted by topic, date, and sometimes by planetary alignment. The Hittites didn't play around with filing systems. You arrive at a chamber deeper still, circular and cold. The floor is inlaid with a spiral motif, representing the eternal return of agreements. A priest meets you at the center, nods once, and beckons to the record stone, a waist-high slab shaped like an altar, marked with ancient syllables for oath, storm, and witness. You kneel. The box is opened. Together, you lift the tablet. It's heavy, denser than it looks. You're not just holding words. You're holding every delay, silence, sheep fat smear, and half-swallowed insult that went into this piece. You're holding hope, cumbersome, fragile hope. Oh. With slow hands, the priest places it in a carved depression on the altar. Then, using a small ladle, he pours a final layer of olive oil and sheep tallow across the top. It gleams like sunlit marble. And now the quirky part. Once sealed, the priest whispers the tablet's name. Not its contents, just its spirit title. In this case, whispers carried on salt. Each tablet gets a name like that, separate from its official designation. Why? Because the gods didn't care for indexes. They listened to poetry. The sewer. You stand back as two apprentices lift the altar slab and tilt it into a vertical position. With a quiet groan, a hidden drawer slides open behind the wall. The tablet is slid in, locked, hidden. It's done. Asyun. Well, almost. Because now comes the inscription of stone. Clay can be broken, lost, burned. So for treaties like Kadesh, a summary is etched in stone, on temple walls and public places, so the people can see it, remember it, fear it. You're led to a scaffold near the Temple of the Thousand Gods, where masons are already chiseling a translated version of the key clauses onto a slab the size of a market stall. Neither king shall raise sword, nor whisper war. If enemies rise, they shall stand together. If famine strikes, they shall share grain. If the gods are angered, both shall kneel. The final line catches your eye. If memory fails, let stone remember. That's the Hittite philosophy in one sentence. Historians still argue whether this public memorializing was for divine reverence or political optics. Some say it warned the people. We are at peace, behave accordingly. Others believe it was mostly theater, an eternal performance of harmony. But what strikes you isn't the text. It's the people watching. Farmers, potters, children holding figs and chewing silently. They're watching the chisel strike, watching history fix itself into permanence. And just when you think this is the end, a man arrives from the north gate. He carries a cracked tablet, blackened from fire. You recognize it. It's from a skirmish 2 years ago. A border truce, one that failed. It's being returned, not to the Hall of Memory, but to the pit of broken promises. You follow, out of morbid curiosity. The pit is behind the hall, where a slope descends into a garden of shattered clay. Here, old oaths lie in pieces, fragments of failed treaties, and cursed agreements. They're not destroyed on purpose. They're just not maintained. They weather, they fall, they're forgotten. A sharp wind blows through, lifting bits of straw and broken words. You step lightly, realizing this too is part of the ritual. To walk among the failed after honoring the new. The priest says nothing but gestures. Remember this, all of this. The peace, the cost, the silence, and the sound it makes when it breaks. You nod. Above, bells ring from the temple tower. Not loud, just enough to remind the city that something sacred was stored today. A treaty, a tether. You walk back slowly, your sandals covered in old dust and fresh conviction. Behind you, the stone whispers in its own language. Beneath you, the clay remembers. The feast that night is quieter than the one after the ritual walk, quieter even than the recital of the treaty. It's the hush of something finally finished, or at least officially postponed. Everyone's a little more relaxed, a little more slouched. Wine is poured without counting cups. Laughter, cautious and sincere, breaks through in odd pockets like wildflowers. You recline beside a scribe who once corrected a priest's pronunciation mid-vow and lived to tell about it. He hands you a fig soaked in honey and nods toward the firelight. You know, he says, the hardest part of peace isn't making it. It's deciding when to believe it. Eskat, you smile, but you're distracted, because one person hasn't left her tent. Queen Puduhepa. You walk past the torches, through the servant paths, toward the side of camp, where the royal tents rise like domes of dyed wool and patience. Her guards recognize you and part like waves before a calm storm. Inside, she's writing. Alone, no priests, no assistants, just a single oil lamp and a reed pen scratching against clay. She looks up once, offers no greeting, just a dry question. Do you know what happens to treaties after their kings die? You hesitate. Some are broken, some are ignored. She nods. And some are read by children who don't know who bled for them. She gestures to the tablet in front of her. It's not the treaty, it's a letter, a personal one, addressed not to a pharaoh or a general, to her daughter. Remember, silence is the mortar of peace, but truth is the stone. Never swear an oath unless you plan to bury it beneath your ribcage. You realize then, the last piece of peace is memory. Not written, not spoken, passed on. Mainstream fact. Puduhepa wrote letters to foreign courts, but also to her children, urging them to remember diplomacy, compassion, and the price of treaties. One such letter references the day the sheep was silent, almost certainly a reference to the ritual binding walk. As you turn to go, she adds, there's one more task. The shepherd. You blink. The shepherd? She nods toward the dark hills. The man who gave us the sheep for the ritual. He asked for no payment, just that the animal be remembered. And so you ride. One last errand before the camp dissolves and the alliance hardens into dusty roots and silver-edged letters. You find him where the land rises toward the ridge, seated beside a cold fire and a worn flute. His beard is wild, his eyes not unkind. You bow low, offer a pouch of barley. He waves it away. It's $60. No, just tell me, did it work? You sit beside him, watching the stars knit themselves overhead. It worked. He nods, looks far away. Good, she was the best of them. It takes a second to realize. He's talking about the sheep, souls. Your quirky tidbit. In Hittite culture, Animals weren't just tools. They were chosen, blessed, sometimes even mourned. There's evidence of funerary texts for ritual oxen and birds who played parts in sacred ceremonies. You ride back in silence, not because there's nothing to say, because there's too much. At dawn, the camp begins to fold itself away. Tents collapse like tired lungs. Flags are lowered, treaties, gifts, memories, all packed up, rolled tight, and sent to cities that might rise or fall by the next moon. You help load the last of the cases. A priest hands you a jar of fat for the road. You decline. Wam de baamd in a Niwan chifro. He smiles. No one ever takes it, but we offer it anyway. You mount your horse. The wind is gentle today. No omens, just the soft hush of a valley that held peace for a little while longer than it needed to. As the caravan crests the first ridge, you look back one last time, and you see her, the queen, standing outside her tent, arms folded, watching, waiting. She lifts one hand, not waving, holding up 2 fingers, a signal, 2 oaths, 2 names, 2 futures, and you ride into one of them. Now the sun has long since slipped behind the Anatolian hills, and the last of the treaty dust settles on quiet paths. The goats have gone quiet, the scribes have tucked away their tablets. The air, finally, is still. You lie back, your head resting on woven wool, the scent of ancient cedar and burnt myrrh lingering faintly in your thoughts. Above you, the stars are scattered like ink across vellum, bright, deliberate, distant, just like the gods the Hittites called upon, and just like the promises they made beneath their gaze. The whisper of peace echoes long after it's spoken. It hums in the silence between war drums. It curls in the sheep fat, hardened on a tablet's edge. It waits in the gaze of a queen, writing letters no one will read for 1,000 years. And even then, someone will wonder if they're dreaming. The hush that follows a treaty is like a breath held too long, fragile, sacred, and necessary. So, tonight you don't need to remember the names of kings or the exact year the Treaty of Kadesh was signed. You don't even need to remember which goat vanished or what color the queen's robes were. Just remember this feeling, the weight of stillness, the power of a paused word, and the faint scent of sheep fat and cedar whispering, you made it this far. So, breathe slowly now. Let your shoulders fall, let your mind float where the rivers of old Anatolia curl, and the embers of peace flicker gently through the tents. You're safe here, for now. And when morning comes again, the tablet will still be there, waiting, just like peace does.